The first thing I noticed wasn't what was missing. It was the echo. I walked into the living room that morning, the floorboards creaking under my slippers, and immediately felt a strange, hollow emptiness. My mother's paintings had always been more than decoration. They were alive. Each brushstroke carried her laughter, her sighs, her gentle hums while she worked. Even after she died, her art filled the house with her presence. I could almost hear her voice in the colors, the soft blues of a summer sky, the warm ochres of a late autumn forest, the delicate smudges of her own hand tracing the edges of a landscape she had loved, and now there was nothing. Bare, pale walls stretched before me, nails jutting out like tiny, accusing fingers. Dust marked the outlines of frames that once held entire worlds. I froze, keys dangling in my hand, and for a long moment I just stared. My chest tightened, a dull ache that ran through my ribs and settled heavy in my stomach. I felt disoriented, like I had walked into someone else's home by mistake. I knew immediately what had happened. I had a sinking suspicion even before I opened my mouth, and yet I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to believe that maybe someone had borrowed the paintings, or that they were being rehung in a new arrangement, or perhaps even cleaned, restored, anything but gone forever. But deep down, a voice whispered the truth. I swallowed, trying to quiet it. I had trusted my brother. Always, Aaron had always been the practical one, the calm, responsible, level-headed sibling. After Mom passed, he had taken charge of most of the arrangements, handling bills, documents, and the smaller details I couldn't face. I let him, I trusted him completely. I finally found my voice, trembling, quieter than I wanted. Aaron, where are Mom's paintings? He didn't look up from his phone. His fingers tapped lazily on the screen. Then, without any hesitation, he said, almost casually, I donated them. She won't need them. The words landed softly, deceptively light, but inside me, something cracked. It wasn't anger at first. Not exactly. It was disbelief, that sharp, twisting ache of betrayal. Those paintings weren't just objects. They were memories, fragments of conversations I hadn't had yet, pieces of a life that had shaped me. And he had given them away without even thinking to ask me, without pausing to consider that I might still be holding on to them. I nodded because that's what I always did. I swallowed because that's what I had been taught, to keep my feelings in, to avoid conflict, to not make waves. And yet, as I stood there in silence, I felt the weight of something else pressing down on me. Grief mixed with disbelief, love mixed with anger, trust mixed with betrayal. The room felt colder than usual. The sunlight coming through the window seemed weaker, almost apologetic, like it had been trying to make up for the loss that had happened without my consent. I glanced around, touching the walls as if that could anchor me to the past, to the life that had once felt safe and whole. For a long moment we just stood there, he scrolling, me frozen. There were no words left to say that morning. Any words would have been too small for what had happened. The paintings were gone, but their absence was louder than anything he could ever say. And so I stood quietly, letting the silence speak for me. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, not yet. I just felt the echo of my mother's voice in the empty spaces, wondering how someone could erase her presence so casually. It was a betrayal wrapped in practicality, hidden in the ordinary. And somehow, I knew, this was only the beginning of the lesson I hadn't yet learned about trust, family, and what it truly meant to protect what is yours. Aaron explained it as if he were doing me a favor. His voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was a stiffness in his posture, a sense that he was bracing for a reaction he didn't expect, or maybe didn't care about. It's for a charity auction, he said, scrolling through his phone like he was reading an innocuous news article. Better this way. They'd just sit here collecting dust. People will enjoy them, and it helps someone in need. He never paused. He never asked if I wanted to keep even one painting. Never asked if I was ready to part with pieces of my mother that still felt alive in my memory. Never asked if they belonged to both of us, or if the last fragments of her presence should stay in my home for me to hold on to. Grief is a strange thing. It silences you, sometimes in ways that feel almost physical. You want to cry, to scream, to demand your rights, but the energy to do so is gone. And often, people mistake silence for consent. I nodded, too stunned to argue, too exhausted to fight. My voice came out as a whisper. You didn't ask me." Aaron shrugged, a little impatiently. "I didn't think it mattered. You were still grieving." I wanted to tell him that grief isn't permission for someone else to decide what belongs to you, but I didn't. Instead, I let the words settle like dust around us, choking me quietly. Later that week, curiosity, and something heavier, a need for closure, drove me to the auction website. I didn't tell anyone I was looking, didn't let Aaron know. I needed to see for myself what had been taken, what had been erased. And when I scrolled through the listings, my chest tightened with a mixture of recognition and disbelief. My mother's paintings were there, photographed under bright lights, every color meticulously captured, yet completely stripped of the life they held in my home. Each stroke, each nuance, seemed to mock me, frozen in still images where once they had breathed. Then I saw it. At the bottom of one listing, almost hidden in a footnote, signed in full. My mother had never signed her full name unless it meant something. Always the initials for casual works, always the full name only when it mattered, and here it was, on one of her most precious paintings. Something in me shifted, not anger, not yet, but a quiet, simmering awareness. The casual dismissal of her work, the casual donation, the lack of consultation. It was intentional. Someone had decided that her creations didn't matter, that my feelings didn't matter. I went to the auction. I didn't tell anyone. I just walked in and sat at the back of the crowded room, unnoticed, listening as strangers bid on pieces that had once watched me grow up. The voices around me were loud, the chatter of commerce buzzing, but my own thoughts were louder. I recognized every brushstroke, every subtle imperfection, every curve of the lines she had drawn. When the auctioneer lifted one particular painting, his voice faltered. He leaned closer, studied the signature, then paused. A hush fell over the room as if everyone sensed that something significant had been revealed. "This signature changes things," he said quietly, almost reverently. The room seemed to contract around me, and for the first time since walking in, I felt the weight of the truth settle into place. This was not just an auction. This was a reckoning, a slow revelation that someone had underestimated me, underestimated the value of what mattered most to me. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just breathed and let the silence wrap around me, holding my anger, my grief, and the faint flicker of resolve that was beginning to rise in me. That day, I realized something critical. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it is carried out in gestures as small as a shrug, a casual explanation, or a whispered dismissal. And yet, even in silence, truth has a way of revealing itself. Slowly, inevitably. The truth doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it drifts in quietly, unnoticed at first, like the soft echo of a memory that finally settles. I hadn't spoken to Aaron about the auction yet. There was no need. His casual betrayal had left a scar, yes, but it had also awakened something in me, a vigilance I hadn't known I possessed. Grief had kept me silent, but it had not kept me blind. I was learning to see. The auctioneer had asked to speak with me privately afterward, and I agreed. There was a way he looked at the paintings that made me realize he saw more than just objects for sale. He saw value, history, a life lived through color and brushstroke. He showed me the provenance documents, the records of my mother's exhibitions, small notes she had left in her studio. I traced the handwriting with my finger, feeling her presence in every swirl and curve of her signature. Aaron had not only underestimated me, he had misjudged my mother's work. The paintings weren't just art, they were her legacy. And because of that signature, the auctioneer explained, the pieces could not legally be considered donations. They were protected, recognized, and valuable in ways even Aaron didn't understand. When Aaron found out, he didn't react with anger or shame. He reacted with confusion. "I thought you wouldn't care," he said one afternoon, leaning against the doorway of my apartment, arms crossed. His tone was defensive, though I could tell beneath it he was scrambling to reconcile his actions with reality. "I did care," I said softly, no shouting, no accusations, just a quiet, measured truth that carried more weight than any argument could. "And I still do." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. There was no apology, no explanation that could undo what had happened. Just the uncomfortable recognition that he had acted selfishly, and I had noticed. That alone was enough to level the playing field. I did not retaliate. I did not call him greedy or cruel. Instead, I let the auctioneer and the legal processes handle the situation. The proceeds were redirected correctly. A portion went to the charity, as intended, but the rest was placed in a trust I controlled. It was quiet justice, not loud, not dramatic, but solid and real. It was the kind of resolution that left no room for future missteps, the kind that didn't require humiliation to make a point. Aaron stopped calling as often after that. He didn't need to. I didn't chase him. I didn't chase the past. Instead, I learned to listen to the silence between us. It spoke volumes. Silence, I realized, has a way of telling the truth louder than any argument. And in that silence, I found clarity. I understood that my mother's work, and by extension my own life, was mine to protect, mine to honor. No one else could decide what mattered to me. Betrayal, I learned, is not only in the act itself, but in the choice to remain passive, in allowing others to make decisions about your life without your consent. I walked through the house one evening, running my fingers along the walls where the paintings had once hung. I traced the dust outlines, remembering the mornings I had watched my mother paint, the afternoons I had sat beside her as she explained her choices. I smiled faintly. The loss was real, but so was my resolve. The truth had revealed itself, slowly and patiently. It wasn't loud, it didn't require confrontation. It simply unfolded quietly, like the turning of a page I hadn't been ready to read until now. And for the first time, I felt the power of quiet justice, not revenge, not anger, but dignity. I realized that silence, observation, and patience could protect what words sometimes failed to. Sometimes the strongest responses aren't shouted. They are lived, they are measured, they are chosen. And that quiet, measured strength, it was mine. I used the money carefully, not to punish, not to prove a point, but to honor what truly mattered. I restored one of my mother's paintings, the one that had always been my favorite. It had been the first she ever signed in full, a piece she had worked on for months, her hands trembling with emotion toward the end. Now, framed and displayed in my living room, it catches the light in the mornings, soft and alive, as though she were still standing beside me. Sometimes I sit in silence before it, tracing the lines with my eyes, listening to the echoes of her voice in my memory. I did not need Aaron to apologize, and he did not offer one. That didn't matter. I did not seek validation or recognition. I had realized something essential. Emotional justice does not require an audience. It does not demand applause or confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful victories are private, silent, and complete. Aaron and I speak now, but rarely. Our conversations are polite, measured, and distant. There is no tension, no shouting matches, no accusations flung in the air. I have learned that relationships cannot always be repaired, but they can be redefined. Boundaries can be drawn without bitterness. Respect can be maintained without closeness. I started spending more time in my mother's studio, a small space at the back of the house I inherited. It had been untouched since her passing, a sanctuary frozen in time. I cleaned the dust, organized the supplies, and let the sunlight fall on the easels and brushes. I didn't paint, not yet. I simply let myself exist there, absorbing the calm energy she had left behind, feeling her guidance in every corner. The trust I controlled became a quiet symbol of what I had learned, that protecting yourself, your boundaries, and your legacy is not selfish. It is necessary. I had grieved, I had been betrayed, but I had also reclaimed what was mine not through anger, but through careful, deliberate action. Sometimes friends would ask how I had managed to stay so calm, how I had avoided confrontation or revenge. I tell them it's simple, though it is not easy. I chose myself. I chose my mother's memory, my own peace, and the integrity of my decisions. And in doing so, I realized that anger is heavy, but quiet strength is light. Anger exhausts, strength endures. There are moments when I see the paintings in the living room, the sunlight falling on them just right, and I remember my mother laughing while she worked, humming softly to herself. I feel her presence, in a way I never did before, not because the paintings survived, but because I survived them intact. I survived the betrayal, the grief, and the quiet attempts to diminish me. Life, I have learned, is not about punishing those who wrong you. It is about protecting yourself, valuing what you love, and carrying it forward with care and grace. My mother's paintings remind me of this every day. They are not just art. They are lessons in patience, dignity, and quiet courage. I have learned to live without anger, without the need for revenge, without the expectation that others will always do what is right. The world is imperfect, people are flawed, but we can choose how we respond. And when we respond with clarity, dignity, and quiet strength, the world shifts, not through punishment, but through the example we set. And in that shift I have found peace. I have chosen myself, and that is enough.